June 22nd, 1941, for 15 a.m., near the Bug River, near Brest, Belarus. The morning mist hung like a gray curtain over the vast plains of the Eastern Front. Oberst Hans Kleemann, commander of the 47th Panzer Regiment of the 17th Panzer Division of the Wehrmacht, stared into the darkness through the narrow viewport of his Panzer IV. The gasoline engines of his tanks roared, and the smell of burnt oil and cold metal permeated the humid air. Kleemann, with the confidence gained from the lightning victories in Poland and France, wore a cold smile on his lips. Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history, had just begun, and he was sure the Red Army, with its rusty tanks and inexperienced soldiers, would crumble before the German war machine. "The Russians have nothing but broken-down tractors," Kleemann said over the radio to his deputy, Lieutenant Karl Richter. His voice was barely audible through the oxygen mask and the roar of the engine. "By nightfall, Brest will be ours." Richter, sitting in the turret of another panzer for a few meters away, laughed. German intelligence reports had painted a clear picture. Light T-26 and BT-7 tanks, with thin armor and weak 45mm guns, were no match for the Panzer IVs equipped with 75mm guns and 50mm armor. Kleemann ordered his men to prepare for the attack. "This is just a morning stroll," he thought. But in the mist, unexpected shadows emerged. Strange, angular shapes with low-slung hulls advanced from the distant hills towards the German lines. Kleemann narrowed his eyes and looked through his binoculars. "What are those?" he whispered. T-34 tanks, with sloped armor and long 76.2mm barrels, emerged from the fog like wolves from an ambush. "New toys from the Russians?" Richter asked over the radio, his laughter crackling through the waves. "They don't even look like real tanks. More like metal boxes on tracks." Kleemann gave the order to fire. The first 75mm shells from the Panzer IVs roared out of their barrels and sped towards the T-34s. But instead of the familiar explosions, a strange sound echoed across the battlefield, the clang of metal on metal, like a hammer hitting a shield. The shells deflected off the sloped armor of the T-34s and buried themselves in the dirt. Kleemann was stunned for a moment. "Fire again," he shouted. But before his crew could react, the T-34s answered. Their 76.2mm guns opened fire, and the shells tore through the Panzer IV's armor with deadly accuracy. Richter's tank turret was blown sky-high in a tremendous explosion, orange flames lighting up the morning sky. Within minutes, half of Kleemann's regiment was a pile of burnt metal. The T-34s, which the Germans called Peashooters, had emerged from the mist like a nightmare. Their speed, powered by 500 horsepower diesel engines, made them terrifyingly agile. Their sloped armor deflected German shells, and their guns turned Panzer IVs into scrap metal one after another. Kleemann, now with cold sweat on his forehead, screamed, "Retreat! Retreat!" But the T-34s, like relentless hunters, continued the pursuit. What Kleemann and the Wehrmacht commanders didn't know was that they were facing a revolution in armored warfare. The T-34, born in the factories of Kharkiv and Stalingrad, was not just a tank, but a symbol of Soviet will. This simple machine, with its sloped armor, powerful diesel engine, and 76.2mm gun, rewrote the rules of the battlefield. Within months, the Germans' mocking laughter turned to terror, and the T-34 became the nightmare of the Wehrmacht's armored forces. In June 1941, when the German army invaded the Soviet Union, the Wehrmacht expected a military parade. The Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, unmatched in Europe, with 30 to 50mm armor and 50mm and 75mm guns, were considered the most advanced fighting machines in the world. German intelligence on the Red Army depicted an image of light and obsolete tanks like the T-26 and BT-7, which would be easily destroyed by the Panzers. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, wrote in his notes, "The Russians cannot compete with us. Their equipment belongs to the last decade." But in the industrial factories of the Soviet Union, amidst the smoke and fire of the furnaces, engineers led by Mikhail Koshkin had designed a tank beyond German imagination. The T-34, which first entered service in 1940, was the result of years of experience from the Spanish Civil War and border clashes with Japan. Its 45mm sloped armor, with a 60-degree angle, provided resistance equivalent to 90mm, deflecting enemy shells as if its hull were made of granite. The V2 diesel engine with 500 horsepower was not only powerful but rarely stalled in the harsh Russian winter, unlike the German gasoline engines. The 76.2mm L-11 gun, and later the F-34, could penetrate the Panzer IVs armor from 1,000 meters away. The Germans, unaware of this threat, underestimated the T-34. Their initial reports described the tank as primitive and lacking sophistication. Oberleutnant Fritz Müller, an intelligence officer of the 4th Panzer Division, wrote in his notes after the first day of battle, "These new Russian tanks are nothing but metal boxes with noisy engines. Our panzers will open them like tin cans." But on the battlefield, the T-34 showed that its simplicity was its greatest strength. This machine, designed for mass production, not only resisted German shells, but also shattered Wehrmacht lines with its speed and firepower. The first encounters of the T-34 with German forces near Brest and Lviv were like an unexpected storm. In one such encounter, Sergeant Ivan Kuznetsov, commander of a T-34 from the Soviet 32nd Tank Regiment, stood alone against 5 Panzer IVs. When German shells deflected off the T-34's sloped armor, Kuznetsov calmly aimed and destroyed 3 panzers one after another. "It was like duck hunting," he later told his comrades. "They fired, but their shells just scratched our hull." Reports of these battles quickly reached the Wehrmacht High Command. General Ernst Kastner, a senior commander of the 17th Panzer Division, wrote in an urgent telegram to Berlin, "We are facing something we have not seen before. These new Russian tanks have armor that repels our shells and a gun that tears our panzers like paper. We must find a solution immediately." But the solution was not quick. The T-34, which the Germans had initially mocked, rapidly became a nightmare that stole sleep from the Wehrmacht commanders. In the smoke-filled factories of Kharkiv, where welding sparks lit up the night and the sound of hammers on metal echoed like the heartbeat of industry, the T-34 was born. Mikhail Koshkin, a young engineer with determined eyes and a creative mind, had designed this war machine not as a tank, but as an answer to the future. In 1938, as Koshkin sketched the initial designs of the T-34 on paper, the Soviet Union was in the fever of preparation for a war whose shadow loomed over Europe. Koshkin, having learned from the battles of the Spanish Civil War, knew that the light T-26 and BT-7 tanks could not withstand the German war machine. He told his team, "We need something that not only fights but survives. Something that shocks the enemy." The T-34, which entered service in 1940, was incomparable to any other tank in the world. Its 45mm sloped armor, at a 60-degree angle, deflected enemy shells as if its body were made of granite. This design, inspired by simple yet revolutionary ideas, gave the T-34 resistance equivalent to 90mm of armor, while weighing only 26 tons, lighter than the 25-ton German Panzer IVs. The V2 diesel engine, with 500 horsepower, not only gave the T-34 relentless power, but also worked like clockwork in the bone-chilling Russian winter, where the Panzer's gasoline engines froze. The 76.2mm L-11 gun, later replaced by the more advanced F-34 model, was the T-34's fiery heart. This gun could fire armor-piercing shells at a deadly velocity, tearing through the 50 mm armor of a Panzer IV from 1,000 meters away like paper. Koshkin, who died of illness in 1940, never saw how his creation conquered the battlefields. But the T-34 crews, who called it Little Mother, knew that this tank was more than a machine. It was a symbol of Soviet resistance. In contrast, the German Panzer IVs, the backbone of the Wehrmacht in 1941, were designed with vertical armor and a short 75 mm Kwk 37 gun to support infantry, not to fight heavy tanks. Oberleutnant Karl Weber, a repair engineer of the 4th Panzer Division, wrote in his notes after the first encounter with the T-34, "We thought the Russian design was primitive, but when we saw our shells ricocheting off their armor, we realized these machines were from the future." The T-34, with its simplicity, rewrote the rules of armored warfare. It didn't need German engineering complexities. It just had to be better, faster, and deadlier. The Germans, proud of their technological superiority, initially mocked the T-34. General Walter Model, one of the Wehrmacht's prominent commanders, said at a meeting in Berlin in the spring of 1941, "The Russians can't build anything better than a tractor. This so-called new tank of theirs is just a noisy metal box." But when battle reports reached the high command, the laughter died down. The T-34 was not just a tank. It was a moving nightmare, racing across the plains of Ukraine and Belarus at 53 kilometers per hour, turning panzers into scrap metal one after another. The Battle of Brest in June 1941 was just the beginning. Near Lviv, in early July, the Soviet 32nd Tank Regiment, under the command of Major Nikolai Popov, faced a German armored unit twice its size. The Germans, confident from their victories, expected to crush the old T-20 SIXS and BT-7s. But when Popov's T-34s appeared from the hills, the battlefield turned into a hell of fire and metal. The Germans, who had not expected such resistance, were horrified. Oberst Kleemann, who had survived the Battle of Brest, wrote in his report to the division commander, "These new Russian tanks are unstoppable. We fired with all our might, but it was like shooting at a concrete wall. When they responded, our panzers opened up like tin cans." Similar reports came from all across the Eastern Front to Berlin. General Guderian, who witnessed the T-34's power himself, wrote in his notes, "We are facing a serious problem. This new tank, the T-34, has challenged our armored superiority." Near Smolensk, in August 1941, another unbelievable story unfolded. A single T-34, its crew wounded and ammunition nearly exhausted, held off a German column for 3 hours. The tank commander, Lieutenant Yuri Krasnov, with only 5 shells left, destroyed 4 Panzer IVs and an ammunition truck. When German soldiers approached with grenades, Krasnov shouted to his driver, "Go forward. Run them over." The T-34 roared towards the German soldiers, scattering them. A German soldier later captured said, "We thought this tank came from hell. Nothing could stop it." These stories of resilience, spread among Soviet soldiers, turned the T-34 into a legend on the Eastern Front. The crews called it Little Mother, not for its appearance, but because it kept them alive in the worst conditions. In contrast, German soldiers began giving the T-34 nicknames, the Red Ghost. This name came from the terror it instilled in the Wehrmacht. Oberleutnant Helmut Schultz, commander of an anti-tank unit, wrote in a letter to his wife, "These Russian tanks come out of the fog like ghosts. You shoot, but nothing happens. Then they shoot, and it's all over." By the autumn of 1941, the T-34 had become a constant nightmare for the Wehrmacht. In the battles around Kiev, where the Germans hoped to achieve a decisive victory by encircling the Red Army, T-34s repeatedly broke through the encirclement lines. In one such battle, a small unit of T-34s under the command of Captain Dmitry Lavrenenko, who later became one of the Soviet Union's greatest tank aces, destroyed 52 German tanks in less than 2 months. Lavrenenko, with a calm smile amidst the smoke and fire, told his crew, "This tank will immortalize us. Just aim and fire." By the autumn of 1941, the name T-34 had become a terrifying legend on the Eastern Front. On the vast plains of Ukraine and Belarus, where dust and smoke filled the battlefield, T-34s emerged like red ghosts from the fog and fire, shattering Wehrmacht lines. The Germans, still reeling from the initial shock, began changing their tactics. But no tactic could stop the relentless wave of T-34s. In the battles around Smolensk and Kiev, these tanks not only resisted but showed the Germans that the Wehrmacht's armored superiority was gone. One of the most dramatic moments occurred in November 1941 near Moscow, where the Russian winter cold froze the bones of German soldiers. The 7th Panzer Division of the Wehrmacht, under the command of General Hans von Kluge, was trying to encircle the Soviet capital. But in the snow and ice, a small unit of T-34s under the command of Captain Dmitry Lavrenenko attacked the German column like lightning. Lavrenenko, with a calm face but eyes sharp like an eagle's, told his crew, "We are not just a tank. We are Moscow's hope. Fire and don't be afraid." On that cold day, Lavrenenko's T-34 alone destroyed 16 German tanks, including 10 Panzer IVs and 6 Panzer IIIs. The T-34's 76.2 mm shells pierced German armor with deadly accuracy, and the Panzer's turrets were blown sky-high one after another. Oberleutnant Karl Reinhard, one of the few survivors of that battle, later said in interrogation, "We thought it was a joke. A single tank against our entire column? But when it fired, it was like hell opened on earth. Our Panzers collapsed like wooden toys." Lavrenenko, killed in December 1941, destroyed 52 German tanks in a few months, becoming one of the Soviet Union's greatest armored heroes. The battles for Moscow were just one example of the T-34's power. On the plains around Kharkiv in the spring of 1942, T-34s surprised the Wehrmacht again. A German armored unit, equipped with new Panzer IVs with the long 75 mm KWK-40 gun, thought it could stop the T-34s. But the T-34s, with their unmatched mobility, crossed hills and rivers and attacked the German lines at high speed. Sergeant Olga Kuznetsova, one of the few female T-34 drivers, shouted to her crew during that battle, "We are faster than them. Go forward and don't let them breathe." Her T-34 maneuvered through enemy fire and destroyed 3 Panzer IVs before being damaged itself. The Germans, now feeling the terror of the T-34 with their entire being, began developing new tactics. They tried to stop the T-34s using 88 mm anti-tank guns and anti-armor mines. But even these measures were not enough. The T-34's sloped armor, which deflected shells, and its diesel engine, which kept working in harsh conditions, made it an unstoppable nightmare. Oberst Walter Kruger, of the 1st Panzer Division, wrote in his report to Berlin, "We cannot stop these tanks. They are faster than us, more resilient than us, and deadlier than us. We must build something better than the Panzer IV, or we have lost this war." In the summer of 1942, when the Battle of Stalingrad began, the T-34s had become a symbol of Soviet resistance. In the ruined streets of the city, where every corner was a scene of bloody battle, T-34s broke German lines with their agility and firepower. In one such battle, Lieutenant Nikolai Semenov, commander of a T-34, drove his tank into the heart of the enemy lines. When an 88 mm anti-tank gun fired at him, the shell hit the front armor but only left a superficial scratch. Semenov laughed loudly and told his gunner, "They think they can pierce us? Show them they're wrong." A few seconds later, The T-34's 76.2 mm gun turned the German anti-tank position into a pile of dirt and metal. While T-34s were decimating the Germans on the battlefield, behind the front lines, in the huge factories of Kharkiv, Stalingrad, and Chelyabinsk, now known as Tankograd, the Soviet industrial heart beat with full power. Workers, many of them women and teenagers replacing the men who had gone to the front, worked day and night on the production lines. Amidst the smoke and welding sparks, T-34s rolled off the assembly line one after another. Each tank, with its simple but sturdy armor and reliable engine, was designed to fight in the worst conditions. Alexia Ivanova, a 19-year-old worker at the Chelyabinsk tractor plant, later wrote in her memoirs, "We knew that every T-34 we built saved the lives of our soldiers. When German bombs shook the factory, we just hammered harder. These tanks were our soul." In 1942, Soviet factories produced over 12,000 T-34s, while Germany produced only about 1,200 Panzer IVs. This disparity, a result of the T-34's simple design and the vast Soviet industrial capacity, allowed the Red Army to reinforce its lines even in the war's worst moments. The Germans, struggling with their own industrial limitations, could not compete with this volume of production. The factories of Krupp and Mann, which produced the Panzer IV and later the Panther and Tiger, faced shortages of raw materials, labor, and Allied air raids. General Friedrich Paulus, commander of the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad, wrote in a letter to Berlin, "The Russians seem to build tanks from the sky. We destroy one, and two more appear. This war is no longer about tactics, it's about numbers." The simplicity of the T-34's design was key to its success. Unlike the Panzer IV, which required complex parts and precise engineering, the T-34 was built with minimal components. Its armor was made of simple welded plates, and its diesel engine required less maintenance. Even under siege, when Soviet factories were under bombardment, workers could produce T-34s at an incredible speed. In Chelyabinsk, a complete T-34 could be assembled in less than 48 hours, a speed the Germans couldn't even imagine. This industrial power not only delivered the T-34 to the battlefield, but also boosted the morale of Soviet soldiers. The soldiers knew that even if their tank was destroyed, another T-34 was on the way. In contrast, the crews of German panzers, facing shortages of spare parts and new tanks, gradually lost hope. Oberleutnant Hans Müller, of the 16th Panzer Division, wrote in January 1943, "We treat our tanks like treasure because we know there are no replacements. But the Russians, it's as if their tanks sprout from the ground." Summer 1943, the plains around Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. The Wehrmacht, now aware of the T-34's power, entered the field with new Panther and Tiger I tanks. These iron giants, with thick armor and 88 mm guns, were supposed to restore German superiority. But the T-34s, now entering the field with the improved T-34-85 model with an 85 mm gun, were ready to shock the Wehrmacht once again. On the morning of July 5, 1943, when the Battle of Kursk began, hundreds of T-34s charged from the Golden Plains towards the German lines. Major Ivan Konovalov, commander of an armored unit, told his crew, "This is the end, comrades. Either we crush them, or they crush us. But our T-34 is stronger than anything they have." When the T-34s roared towards the Panthers and Tigers, the Germans were astonished. The sloped armor of the T-34-85 still resisted many German shells, and its 85 mm gun could penetrate the Panthers' armor at close range. In one of the most dramatic moments of the battle, a T-34-85 commanded by Lieutenant Valery Zakharov stood alone against three Panthers. Zakharov, wounded and blood flowing from his forehead, shouted to his driver, "Forward!" Straight at them. His T-34 sped through the smoke and fire, and his gunner destroyed 2 Panthers with deadly accuracy. The third, trying to escape, got stuck in mud and was turned into a pile of burnt metal by an 85mm shell. Zakharov, breathing heavily, told his crew, "You see? This is our T-34. No one can stop us." By the summer of 1943, the Germans' mocking laughter about the T-34 had fallen silent. The tank they once called a noisy metal box, or Peashooter, now appeared in Wehrmacht reports under a new name, the Red Ghost. This name came not only from the red color of the Soviet flag, but also from the terror the T-34 instilled in German soldiers. On the Eastern Front, from the swamps of Belarus to the plains of Ukraine, the T-34 had become a nightmare that stole sleep from Wehrmacht commanders. Oberst Hans Kleemann, who had survived the Battle of Brest in June 1941, now sat in the headquarters of the 9th Panzer Division near Kursk. His face, once full of confidence, was now etched with lines of fatigue and worry. In a meeting with senior officers, he said in a voice trembling with anger and frustration, "We underestimated these tanks. We thought we were dealing with a few tractors, but these T-34s, they are devilish machines. Their armor laughs at our shells, and their guns open our panzers like tin cans." A young officer, still hopeful of German superiority, asked, "But General, what about our new Panthers and Tigers? They can stop these Russians, right?" Kleemann replied with a cold look, "Maybe they can stop one, but the Russians have 10 more." This shift in German perspective wasn't only among commanders. Infantrymen facing T-34s on the front lines told stories of terror that spread through Wehrmacht camps. Sergeant Fritz Henk, of the 123rd Infantry Regiment, after a battle near Oriol, wrote in a letter to his brother, "When you hear the roar of a T-34, it's like death itself is coming at you. We fired with our 37mm guns, but it was like shooting at a wall. Then they fired, and half our unit vanished in the blink of an eye." German soldiers began coining the term T-34 fever, the state of panic that seized them when the roar of the T-34's diesel engine was heard in the distance. But even when Germany fielded the Panther and Tiger I, the T-34 remained a step ahead, not because of complexity, but because of numbers and reliability. Oberleutnant Klaus von Stein, commander of a Panther unit at Kursk, after a battle where he lost half his tanks, wrote in his diary, "Our Panther is strong, but when we destroy one T-34, 10 more pour down from the hills. They are like ants, you can't stop them." This sense of frustration, which permeated from the front lines to the high command, signaled a profound change. The T-34 was no longer a joke. It was a symbol of Soviet invincibility. On the plains of Kursk, where the largest tank battle in history was unfolding, the T-34 faced not only the Panzer IV, but also the new German giants, the Panther and Tiger I. This battle, which peaked in July 1943, was the stage where the T-34 was tested against its rivals. German soldiers and commanders, who hoped the Panther and Tiger would restore superiority to the Wehrmacht, soon discovered that the T-34, even against these giants, had something to say. In one of the most dramatic moments of the Battle of Kursk, a unit of T-34-85s, under the command of Major Vladimir Petrov, encountered a group of newly arrived Panthers. The Panthers, with 80mm front armor and the long 75mm KWK-42 gun, were designed to destroy the T-34. But Petrov, standing in the turret of his T-34-85 feeling the hot wind of the steppe on his face, told his crew, "They are bigger, but we are faster. Hit their sides." His T-34-85 maneuvered through the smoke and dust, and its new 85mm gun pierced the side armor of a Panther from 400 meters away. The Panther, its crew not expecting such a blow, was engulfed in orange flames. On the same day, a Tiger I, with 100 mm armor and an 88 mm KWK-36 gun, entered the field. Oberleutnant Helmut Reiner, the Tiger's commander, confidently told his crew, "These T-34s are like mice against us. Prepare to fire." But when Petrov's T-34s appeared from the hills, with a speed the heavy Tiger couldn't match, the situation changed. The T-34s maneuvered around the Tiger, and one of them, with a precise shot to the track, stopped the German giant. Then, 3 other T-34s fired at close range, and the Tiger, supposed to be impregnable, became a pile of burnt metal. Reiner, who jumped out of his tank, later said in interrogation, "We thought our Tiger was invincible. But these T-34s, they were like hungry wolves." Compared to the M4 Sherman, deployed on the Western Front, the T-34 was superior due to its simpler design and adaptability to the harsh conditions of the Eastern Front. In the autumn of 1943, a group of Soviet officers tested Shermans sent via Lend-Lease against the T-34. Lieutenant Igor Kuzmin, who participated in the tests, said, "The Sherman is good, but it's like a gentleman on the battlefield. The T-34 is like a savage warrior, fast, brutal, and ready for anything." The T-34's sloped armor and diesel engine performed better in the muddy and snowy terrain of the Eastern Front, while the Sherman was more vulnerable on softer ground. Against the Panzer IV, the T-34 was still the king of the battlefield. In a battle near Kharkiv in August 1943, a T-34 unit faced Panzer IVs equipped with a long 75 mm gun. Oberst Franz Beck, commander of the German unit, told his crew, "We are equal to them now. Fire and don't be afraid." But the T-34s, with their unmatched mobility, quickly attacked the Panzer IV's flanks. Within minutes, half of Beck's unit was destroyed. One of the T-34 crewmen, Sergeant Mikhail Grigorov, later said, "The Panzer IV was like a moving fortress, but we were like lightning. They couldn't catch us." These battlefield comparisons showed that the T-34, though not technologically complex, had an unmatched combination of armor, mobility, and firepower. The Panther and Tiger were stronger, but heavy and slow. The Sherman was reliable, but too delicate for the Eastern Front. The improved Panzer IV couldn't compete with the vast numbers of T-34s. Major Petrov, after the Battle of Kursk, told his soldiers, "Our T-34 is not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. It just has to be better than the enemy, and it is." Behind the bloody fronts of the Eastern Front, where soldiers fought in their T-34s against the Wehrmacht, the industrial heart of the Soviet Union beat with relentless power. The huge factories in Kharkiv, Stalingrad, and Chelyabinsk, now known as Tankograd, roared day and night. Amidst the smoke of the furnaces, welding sparks, and the sound of heavy hammers, T-34s rolled off the production lines one after another. These tanks, with their simple but robust design built to fight in the worst conditions, were not just war machines, but symbols of the Soviet people's will. The factory workers, many of them women, teenagers, and even elderly people replacing the men who had gone to the front, worked with calloused hands and eyes full of determination. Maria Petrova, a 22-year-old worker at the Chelyabinsk plant, welded T-34 armor plates for 16 hours every day. She later wrote in her memoirs, "Every armor plate I welded felt like a shield for our soldiers. When German bombs shook the factory roof, we just worked harder." The T-34 was our soul. In 1943, Soviet factories produced over 15,000 T-34s, a number the Wehrmacht couldn't even imagine. This industrial power, enhanced by the workers' dedication and the T-34's intelligent design, allowed the Red Army to rebuild its lines even in the war's darkest days. Unlike Germany, which struggled with shortages of raw materials, labor, and Allied air raids, the Soviet Union produced T-34s at an incredible speed. A complete T-34 could be assembled in less than 48 hours, while producing a Panzer IV or Panther in German factories took weeks. General Walter Model, who faced the wave of T-34s at Kursk, wrote in his report to Berlin, "The Russians seem to rain tanks from the sky. We destroy one, and 3 more arrive." But the story of the T-34 wasn't just about the factories. It was about the people who kept it alive. Frontline mechanics, often working under enemy fire, repaired T-34s with minimal tools. Major Nikolai Vasilyev, in charge of repairs for an armored unit, told his soldiers, "The T-34 is like a loyal horse. Even if wounded, it still runs. Just give it some oil and a few screws." In one instance, in the winter of 1942, a T-34 whose armor had been pierced by 12 anti-tank shells was returned to service with basic repairs on the battlefield. Oberleutnant Klaus Mahler, who witnessed this, wrote in his notes, "We can't kill these tanks. Even when you think you've destroyed them, they come back." This spirit, flowing through the factories and the front lines, made the T-34 more than a machine. Soviet soldiers called it Little Mother, not for its size, but because it kept them alive in the worst moments of the war. In contrast, German soldiers, facing shortages of spare parts and new tanks, gradually lost hope. Sergeant Hans Schultz, of the 4th Panzer Division, wrote in a letter to his family, "We guard our panzers like treasure because we know there are no replacements. But the Russians, it's as if their T-34s grow from the ground." By 1944, the T-34 was no longer just a tank. It was a symbol of Soviet victory. In Operation Bagration, launched in June 1944, hundreds of T-34s attacked the heart of the Eastern Front, crushing Army Group Center. On the plains of Belarus, where dust and smoke filled the sky, T-34s advanced like a red storm. Major Andrei Kozmin, now a veteran with over 100 combat missions, told his crew, "This T-34 of ours will take us to Berlin. Just step on the gas and fire." In one of the most dramatic moments of Operation Bagration, a unit of T-34-85s under the command of Lieutenant Valery Zakharov encountered a German column of Panzer IVs and Panthers near Minsk. Zakharov, wounded and blood flowing from his arm, shouted to his gunner, "Hit their sides. Don't let them breathe." His T-34-85 maneuvered through the smoke and fire and destroyed 3 Panthers within minutes. When a Panzer IV tried to attack from behind, Zakharov swiftly turned the tank towards the enemy and with a precise shot turned it into a pile of burnt metal. He later told his comrades, "This T-34 is like a dancer, fast, strong, and deadly." The Germans, now in retreat, had no hope of stopping the T-34s. Oberst Franz Beck, who had been defeated by T-34s at Kursk, wrote in his diary in July 1944, "We cannot win this war. The T-34s are everywhere, on the plains, in the forests, even in the streets of cities. They are like shadows of death." In Operation Bagration, the Red Army killed or captured over 400,000 German soldiers and destroyed hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles. The T-34s, with their sloped armor and 85mm guns, were the backbone of this victory. By the spring of 1945, T-34s had reached the gates of Berlin. In the ruined streets of the Reich's capital, where every corner was a scene of bloody battle, T-34s advanced with a roar. In the final battle for the capture of Berlin, a T-34-85 commanded by Captain Ivan Semenov attacked the heart of the German lines. When an 88mm anti-tank gun fired at him, the shell hit the front armor, but only left a deep scratch. Semenov laughed loudly and told his crew, "This is our T-34. Even the devil can't stop us." A few seconds later, his 85mm gun destroyed the anti-tank position, clearing the way for the Soviet infantry. On May 2, 1945, when the red flag was raised over the Reichstag, T-34s stood in the streets of Berlin, wounded but proud. German soldiers, now surrendered, looked at these tanks with eyes full of terror and respect. A young German soldier, speaking in a prisoner interrogation, said, "We laughed at the T-34s in 1941. We thought they were Russian toys. Now I understand they brought us our death." General Georgy Zhukov, who led Operation Barbarossa and the capture of Berlin, said in his victory speech in Moscow, "The T-34 was the heart and soul of the Red Army. This tank, built by the hands of our workers and fought with the courage of our soldiers, brought the Wehrmacht to its knees." In contrast, General Heinz Guderian, who once believed in German armored superiority, wrote in his final war notes, "We underestimated the T-34. This tank, with its simplicity and numbers, crushed us. We were brave, but bravery was not enough against this iron wave." In 1985, at a World War II veterans reunion in Moscow, Soviet and German soldiers faced each other for the first time since the war. German General Walter Model, who had fought T-34s at Kursk, said in his speech, "We laughed at the T-34 in 1941. We thought the Russians couldn't build anything better than a tractor. But we were wrong. The T-34 was a masterpiece, simple but deadly. They defeated us not with better tactics, but with will and numbers. When you heard the roar of a T-34, you knew death was near." At the Kubinka Tank Museum near Moscow, a restored T-34-85 stands, its armor still showing the scars of battle. Next to it, a plaque lists the tank's specifications and honors. Over 84,000 built, thousands of German tanks destroyed, and a decisive role in the Soviet victory. But the real story of the T-34 is summed up in a quote from an unknown German soldier, recorded in a 1945 interrogation report. "We laughed at the T-34 because we thought it was a toy. But when it came at us, we realized this tank was our death. Our laughter died with our comrades." When the year 1944 arrived, the T-34 was no longer just a tank. It was a symbol of the Soviet Union's indomitable will. In Operation Barbarossa, one of the largest offensives in history, T-34s attacked German lines like a wave of red steel. The plains of Belarus, soaked with mud and blood, became a stage for displaying the T-34's power. Hundreds of T-34-85s, with their new 85mm guns, crushed the Wehrmacht lines and brought Army Group Center to its knees. Near the city of Babruysk, in June 1944, a unit of T-34-85s under the command of Major Yuri Konovalov encountered a German armored column consisting of Panzer IVs, Panthers, and even a few Tiger Is. The sky was filled with smoke, and the sound of explosions shook the ground. Konovalov, wounded from a previous battle on his shoulder, looked at his crew from the turret hatch and said in a firm voice, "Comrades, today we make history. Our T-34 is stronger than these German giants. Just aim and fire." His crew, tired from months of war but determined, shouted back, "For the motherland." Konovalov's T-34-85 advanced swiftly from the hills, and his gunner, Sergeant Ivan Grigorov, fired with deadly accuracy. The first 85mm shell hit the side armor of a Panther and set it ablaze. A second Panther, trying to attack from the rear, fell victim to the T-34's quick maneuver. Konovalov shouted to his driver, Sasha, "Turn left. Hit their sides." The T-34 turned like a swift wolf and with another shot destroyed the second Panther. Oberleutnant Helmut Weber, commander of the German unit, watching from a distance, whispered in horror, "These tanks, they've come from hell." By the end of that day, Konovalov's unit had destroyed 14 German tanks, while only one T-34 was lost. Stories like this spread across the Eastern Front. Near Vilnius, a single T-34, its crew with only 2 shells left, managed to hold off a German column for several hours. Lieutenant Nina Kuznetsova, one of the few female T-34 commanders, with eyes full of fire, told her crew, "We may die, but we'll take these Germans with us." With 2 precise shots, she destroyed a Panzer IV and an ammunition truck, then drove the T-34 towards the enemy soldiers, scattering them. When her ammunition ran out, Nina and her crew dismounted and continued fighting with machine guns until reinforcements arrived. German soldiers later captured said, "We thought we were dealing with a madman. That T-34 was like an angry ghost." These battles showed that the T-34 was unmatched not only because of its armor and gun, but also because of the courage of its crew. Soviet soldiers, who had fought in the T-34 through winter cold and summer heat, saw this tank as a comrade. Sergeant Mikhail Popov, a T-34 gunner, wrote in his memoirs, "When you were inside the T-34, you felt nothing could stop you. Its armor was like a mother's embrace, and its gun was like a father's fist." This sense of unity between soldier and machine made the T-34 an unstoppable force. Behind the front lines, the stories of the T-34 were not limited to the battlefield. The workers of the Tankograd factories, who worked day and night to produce these tanks, were themselves part of the T-34 legend. At the Chelyabinsk plant, a young worker named Anna Semernova, only 17 years old, was responsible for welding T-34 armor plates. Every day, with her small but strong hands, she joined steel plates together, and when German bombs targeted the factory, she and her colleagues hid under tables but never stopped working for a moment. Anna wrote in her diary, "Every T-34 that left the factory was like a child we sent to war. We knew these tanks kept our brothers and fathers alive." One unforgettable story involved an old man named Dmitry Ivanov, a retired mechanic who returned to the Stalingrad factory in 1943 to repair damaged T-34s. Dmitry, over 60 years old, with trembling hands but the precision of a surgeon, rebuilt the T-34's diesel engines. He told the younger workers, "These tanks are the heart of the Soviet Union. If we keep the heart strong, the enemy cannot break us." During one German air raid, when a bomb hit the workshop, Dmitry was buried under rubble but told the workers to save the half-finished T-34 first. He later said in the hospital, "I will die, but the T-34 will live. That is enough." On the front, field mechanics had their own stories. In the winter of 1944, near Warsaw, a T-34 with a broken track stuck in mud was exposed to attack by a Panther unit. A young mechanic, Vladimir Kuzmin, ran towards the tank under enemy fire and, with a wrench and a few bolts, repaired the track in less than 10 minutes. When the T-34 moved again and destroyed the Panther with one shot, the tank crew hugged Vladimir and shouted, "You brought this monster's heart back to life." Vladimir, drenched in sweat and mud, smiled and said, "The T-34 is alive itself. I just reminded it it's still breathing." These human stories, from factory workers to soldiers and frontline mechanics, made the T-34 more than a war machine. Every T-34 that left the factory carried the hope and will of a people fighting for survival. Even the Germans, who looked at these tanks with terror, could not deny this spirit. Oberst Klaus Reiner, captured in 1944, said in interrogation, "We weren't fighting tanks. We were fighting people who worshipped these tanks like their gods." The T-34 wasn't just steel, it was the soul of the Russians. When World War II ended in May 1945, the T-34 was recognized as one of the war's most decisive weapons. Over 84,000 T-34s had been built, and these tanks not only crushed the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front, but also paved the way for the Allied victory. The T-34's sloped armor, which deflected enemy shells, became a standard for post-war tank design. Its diesel engine and Christie suspension, unmatched on the rough terrain of the Eastern Front, inspired modern tanks like the T-55 and T-72. In military museums around the world, from Kubinka in Russia to Normandy in France, T-34s stand as memorials to courage and ingenuity. At Kubinka, a T-34-85 with battle scars and a hull that still smells of smoke and gunpowder reminds visitors how this tank changed history. Next to it, a plaque shows a quote from General Georgy Zhukov. The T-34 was the heart of the Red Army. This tank, built with steel and blood, with it we brought the enemy to its knees. But perhaps the strongest testimony to the T-34's legacy lies in the words of an unknown German soldier who, in the last days of the war, was captured on the streets of Berlin. He, with eyes full of fatigue and respect, told his interrogator, "We laughed at the T-34 in 1941. We thought it was a toy, a joke from the backward Russians. But when they came out of the fog, with armor that laughed at our shells and a gun that crushed our Panzers, we realized we were wrong. The T-34 was our death, and our laughter was buried with our comrades in the plains of Russia." The T-34 was not just a tank. It was a story of resistance, sacrifice, and victory. From the smoke-filled factories of Tankograd to the ruined streets of Berlin, this tank changed the course of history. Its crews, its workers, and the people who built it sent a message to the enemy with every T-34. You can fight, but you cannot break us. And in that message, the T-34 achieved immortality.